Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Closing out this first week of November with a busy podcast that will satiate the appetite for any sports fan out there, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we could put baseball in our rearview mirror, no more baseball talk, although I have some baseball news to get to, which will be on the back end of this podcast, so you have to stay tuned for that. But the NFL and college football will now reign supreme here from now until about the second week of February. And as we know, the quote-unquote halfway point, which, again, with the 17-game season, I hate it. Just the imbalance of the games that are played. But once we get past this week, we will certainly get a better feel, not only for what we've witnessed in the first half, but maybe, quite honestly, what the second half could entail. That will be Monday's podcast as far as going over the first half. And then a week from today, I will take a look into the second half. So just to keep that in mind, for those that are here for the very first time to wonder, what is this sports podcast about? Well, you're going to get plenty of NFL, as I've detailed there, come Monday and next Thursday, a first and second half look. And as far as today, you're going to get the latest as far as not only week 10, but also a recap of the trade deadline, which is where I want to begin. And the three teams that are involved, I understand there were other trades, whether it was Rashid Shaheed going from New Orleans to Seattle. They needed another wide receiver to go along with JSN. All right, fine, I understand, I dig it. Or even Jacksonville acquiring Jacoby Myers from the Vegas Raiders. All right, yeah, small potatoes, no biggie. And even though Jalen Phillips, the Eagles picked him up to go along with a couple of other defensive players that they picked up here along the way, the Michael Carter II that they got from the Jets. And I know there's another player that I'm missing off the top of my head. I know it was another corner, I believe, as I'm rubbing my hands together like a mad scientist if you're watching on Spotify or on YouTube. But we know that the Eagles have made some upgrades, but the three teams that are involved here, especially in the final 24 hours leading into the 4 p.m. deadline there on Tuesday, it's obviously Jets, Colts, Cowboys. And I'm going to go in that order because I don't like doing winners or losers. I don't like trying to get into the whole, who got the better of this deal, that deal. Now, I think it's quite obvious just in that order as to whom came out on top here over that 24-hour period. And I'll start with the Jets. If you're a Jet fan, I'm sure you're probably ecstatic knowing that you have a plethora and a boatload of number one draft picks coming your way over the next 2 years. Now, I understand you got to give up something to get something, 100%. But I would think with the way this regime, the GM Darren Muji, I guess I should pronounce his last name, and obviously with the head coach there and one Aaron Glenn, as they try to maneuver through this first season, hopefully they could get a few more wins under their belt. Hopefully they could end this quote-unquote second half on a higher note. That's not to say they're going to win 7 of 8 and end up being close or near 500, but let's just say for argument's sake, what have they played? 8 games to this point, so they have 9 to go. All right, if the Jets are 4 and 5, I know it's under 500, but obviously they will close out the last 9 games of the season better than the first 8 and how they started. So when you have guys like Sauce Gardner, who gets traded to the Colts for not 1, 2 number 1 picks, and they also get a wide receiver back and Adonai Mitchell, where if you're the faithful of the gang green, I'm sure you're like, Sauce, at the start of the year, we gave him a handsome contract. He was going to be one of our guys moving forward. But as you've seen, Sauce has actually regressed a little bit since his rookie year where he was all-pro. And yes, he's made Pro Bowls, but we've seen some slippage here with Sauce Gardner to the point where, listen, if the Colts came to them and said, we're going to give you a number 1 pick next year and a number 1 pick in 2027, how could you pass that up? I think any GM, even if you're a guy that has just got the job in a one Darren Muji, you have to say, bring it on. So whether you're the seasoned GM that knows its way around the block, and I understand you're trying to build a team and you want to have guys that are going to be not only just a part of the fabric, but a guy that you know when you think about whether it's the offensive or defensive side of the ball, that you know when you think about the Jet defense, the front one guy that's going to come to mind is going to be Sauce Gardner. Or if it's their offense, you're going to think Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver, because they don't have a quarterback right now. But when the Jets were able to get that type of deal, and then later on get another trade from the Dallas Cowboys where they shipped Quinnen Williams, who was a one-time All-Pro, where they get a second-round pick next year in 2026, and then a first-round pick in 2027, again, you have to say, bring it on. Let's trade whomever else we can for more number one picks. And this is where the Jets are going. This is the direction that they're headed to. And you know what? You have to give them kudos. We understand that these draft picks aren't guarantees. They aren't locks, and depending on where they fall. So I get it with the Colts. If they continue to play well and have one of the top records in this AFC, let alone the entire league, all right, that pick's going to be somewhere in the low 20s, maybe from 25 to 30, for all we know. So you're not going to get a great number one pick, but with the way the Jets are playing this year, even if they win 4 games, they'll probably be with at least in the top 6 with that type of record, because you're going to think the Saints are going to be awful for the remainder of the year. You could also look at a couple of other teams that you would think that they're going to have long years. The Dolphins, I know they have 2 wins right now. Maybe if the Dolphins and Jets are tied or somewhere within 4 or 5 wins throughout this year, who knows who's going to get the tiebreaker on that. And there are a couple other teams that I'm missing off the top of my head that you would think, oh, there's no way that the Jets are going to be in contention as far as maybe getting close to a number one pick as possible. And as it is right now, it's between them and the Saints. I mean, let's call it as we see it. But when you look at a team that is trying to rebuild and they don't have a quarterback, and even if the Jets do get a top 5 pick next year, where maybe they could use the draft capital that they have, if there's a bona fide guy that they know they need to get. And yes, Jet fans, I know you've been through this movie and this situation before. Whether it was Sam Darnold in 2018, and then 3 years later with Zach Wilson, and how's that worked out? Well, hopefully the next guy that could be in line, whether it's this coming draft or the following one, could be a can't miss. And if you're the Jets, right now, you're banking on the future. You're not banking on today. And you know what? You have to give the GM credit. Those are 2 deals that, let me tell you, if I was a GM, I would have made. Because how could you pass up getting 2 number ones from one team and a second round pick and another number one from another, to where in the next 2 drafts, you're going to have 2 number one picks next year, albeit the second one being a lower pick. But then you're going to have 3 number one picks the following year, where Jets, Colts, Dallas are going to be right there. You would think if the Cowboys with Jerry Jones at the helm, you never know, they could be a team that doesn't make the playoffs, and it could be maybe a 14th pick overall. And the Colts, from one year to the next, if Daniel Jones doesn't get re-signed there and they're going to have to draft a quarterback or go back to Anthony Richardson, they could be, who knows, in maybe not football Siberia, but somewhere in purgatory. Then you have a situation where, wait a second, I have 3 picks maybe in the top 14, and now I can really package those suckers to get the quarterback that you want. Because a lot of people are saying, as of right now, that it could be a very big-time quarterback and wide receiver draft in 2027. So you got to like what you see if you're a Jet fan. I mean, that's all there is to it. And here's the other thing. I know that Jerry Jones had it out for Quinnen Williams dating back to the summer, when the rumor had it that the Jets, where Jerry Jones had called them to see, hey, can we get Quinnen Williams and we'll send you Micah Parsons. And look what happened. They were better off not doing that, because, of course, they would have to pay Micah Parsons the big bucks and make him one of the highest paid players in the sport that's not a quarterback. And in the process, you got their number one pick the following year and a second-round pick, where you didn't have to pay a ton of money to the pass rusher in Parsons on a team that, let's face it, was going nowhere this year. So Moogie is looking like he is the executive of the year right now. So if you're a Jet fan, you got to be over the moon. That's number one. So that's where the Jets, in my eyes, I feel that they are going, that they went for it. go for it as far as like, we're not blowing it up, but we're certainly going to retool here and revamp our thought process and even our plan to the point where we're going to start now to build for the future. Hopefully get that quarterback in position, draft a couple of big needs, whether it's maybe more offensive linemen, although they have some young offensive linemen on the team now, or we'll get that pass rusher, or maybe that dominant linebacker, or whomever it may be. So right now, they're sitting pretty. At least you think. I understand no guarantees, no locks with these number one picks, but they're off to a great start. So they went for it. Now, the Colts are the team that are going for it, meaning that they're 7-2. They have a top record there in the AFC, and they're thinking about the big picture. And really, in essence, the big picture is just this year. Because who knows what's going to happen after this year, considering Daniel Jones signed a one-year contract. If he continues to play well, notwithstanding the game in Pittsburgh this past Sunday, but who knows? Maybe they're going to push all the chips to the middle of the table to think that Daniel Jones is their guy. They're going to rely on Jonathan Taylor being the guy that's going to carry the ball 20, 25, maybe even 30 times depending, and take that defense with now Sauce Gardner as a corner, maybe rejuvenated, motivated to get himself back to that all-pro status. And the Colts feel like they have as good as a shot as anyone in the AFC this year, considering that the Chiefs are down, although still dangerous. The Bills, not been great, although they're a team that could still end up with a top seed when it's all said and done. But when you think about what the Colts have done to this point, and now you bring in a guy like Gardner to shore up that secondary, you got to give it up. Now, I understand the Colt fan could be like, wait a minute, we can have 2 number one picks. We couldn't give up a situation where maybe like the Cowboys were a 2 and a 1, or maybe a 3 and a 2, or whatever. You got to get something in order. You got to give up something in order to get something. That's the old saying. And Gardner, we know his potential. We know his talent. And who knows what he's going to bring there over the last, 8 games of the season there for the Colts. And if he does perform close to what he did in his rookie year, then guess what? They could have a guy that can maybe lock down one side of the field, and maybe the defense could fly around and try to win games, not more predicated on their offense, but more so on their defense. And listen, I'm not trying to say that the Colts are the 85 Bears, but getting a guy like Gardner is certainly going to help. So you got to give it up for what the Colts are doing, because this isn't baseball where the Pirates aren't going to go out to get a big-time player at the deadline if they're hanging around the wild card, or you can name any other team. The Chicago White Sox, although they play in a big market, but still they pretty much run themselves like a small market team, or the Marlins or the Rockies. This is the NFL where everybody has the same playing field. So if you're a Colt fan, I understand it's tough to give up the 2 number ones, but would you rather kind of be a team that's 10-7 that may win a playoff game, or at least be in the playoffs but not go far? Or do you want your organization to say, we have an opportunity to bring this player on board. He's already going to get his money. He already signed that contract, and now he's part of our team. Let's see what he can do. I'm sure you're going to take the latter than the former. And then lastly, the Cowboys. So for a team that's going for it in the Colts, and an organization that's going for it in the Jets, what are the Cowboys doing? Going for what? This team is 3-5-1. We saw what happened there on Monday night. Flat out embarrassment. Jacoby Brissett was looking like Randall Cunningham. And the Cardinals did away with the Cowboys, who are now 3-5-1. And they go into their bye this week. So they bring in not only Logan Wilson, the linebacker from the Bengals, who, oh, by the way, the Bengals defense is obviously nothing to sneeze at. A good linebacker, though, was involved in that controversial call there, if you remember, in the Super Bowl against the Rams, that 3rd and 10, there was that hold on, I believe, Cooper Kupp, which was ticky-tack and very questionable at that. But is a very good linebacker, so okay, he's a guy that will certainly be an upgrade there. And then they trade for Quinnen Williams, who, to go along with Kenny Clark, who was part of the Micah Parsons deal. Now you got a situation where you got an interior lineman that maybe, or 2 guys that could slow down or even stop the run. When you look at, they play the Eagles, I believe they play him coming out of the bye. And not that Barkley's had a big-time year, but you got teams in your division, and even in a conference for that matter, that you're going to have to slow down and stop. And therefore, they got the 2 guys on the interior that could do that. But where are the Cowboys going? Have you seen the Cowboys schedule in the second half of the year? Not easy. They play Philly, as I mentioned. They got Kansas City coming to them on on Thanksgiving. They got to go to Detroit. They play Minnesota, who I think could be in the hunt. Their schedule is not easy. So for those who are thinking that these two trades, and I mentioned this on my channel a couple days ago, where Jerry Jones just 8-9 days ago came out and said, I'd be skeptical that whatever trades that we're going to bring, especially on the defensive side, is going to be that much more of a help to our team second half of the year. And then on Monday, he comes out and says, I got somebody that's going to be a part of the Cowboys, but I'm not going to mention his name right now, yada, yada, yada. And it was comical because when it was Logan Wilson at first, it was like, wait a second, this is the guy he's talking about? No shade on Logan Wilson. But then we find out later on it's Quinton Williams, and all right, that's a bigger name, number 3 pick overall coming out of Alabama, but it's not as if you're bringing in Aaron Donald 2.0 or Lawrence Taylor or Ronnie Lott. I mean, Quinton Williams is a good player, very good player. But is he all of a sudden going to be a game wrecker? Is he all of a sudden going to be the guy that's maybe going to propel this defense to stop teams and therefore stay in games with their offense and maybe have an opportunity to be in the wild card hunt when you get to weeks 14, 15, and beyond? I don't think so. And Jerry being Jerry, and what more can you say? And this comes on the heels, as I just found out a short time ago, and just a terrible story, where Marshawn Kneeland, second-year player, came out of a small school, Western Michigan. I know he played last year briefly. The one game that I really got to see him up close was the Steeler game, because a lot of the other games I'm in and out of, Thanksgiving, you're not really focused, you're with family, and certain other games where the Cowboys, they obviously were out of it. But for Kneeland, a guy very young, a lot of potential. They loved his motor, considering he came out from a small school. You could say he was an underdog. Died last night, age of 24. I mean, just a terrible story, defensive end. And thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Kneeland family, to the Cowboys, NFL. I mean, that is just as bad as you could even. Just to know that a young person, and we don't know the details of his death. Hopefully it wasn't anything that was too severe, whether it was self-inflicted or, you just don't want to hear that in any way, shape, or form. But the Cowboys now going to have to play with heavy hearts here throughout the remainder of this week and the remainder of the year for that matter. But let's face it, is this team going to make a run? They're 12th in the NFC right now. They have so many teams that are ahead of them, and having that tie doesn't help. And right now their tiebreaker situation is terrible because they've lost to the Bears, who the Bears not only have a better record, and they have the tie, which helps them out, but that would only help them out if they have the same amount of wins at the end of the year. So that's one of those things where you have to look at, if you're a Cowboy fan, that, all right, you made these moves for what? Is this for the future? The immediate future? And again, these aren't game-wrecking defensive players. So that's my point. And that's pretty much what we have there with the trade deadline and everything that led up to it and the aftermath of it, etc. And now as we get to a week 10, which has a few games on the docket that we can look forward to as I pull up the schedule here. And when you have a situation tonight where you don't have any more baseball, no more sports equinoxes, and baseball wasn't really on a Thursday anyway when it came to the World Series, because it started Friday, and then the last week, if you recall, was between games 5 and 6. But tonight's game, you have Vegas at Denver. I understand Denver trying to see if they could get that top spot in the conference where they're tied with New England and the Indianapolis Colts, and they actually have the tiebreaker over the Colts, as you know. As a matter of fact, I take that back. The Colts have the tiebreaker. Denver actually should have won that game, but they didn't. But at least you have a team that is trying to fight for AFC supremacy at this very moment. Vegas, they're a dead team walking, as you know. The Sunday slate, you have the Colts hosting the Falcons, but that's a game that's being played in Germany. So there we go. And I believe you have 2 more games left of this ilk, where you have the game Sunday, and then the following week you have Washington at Miami, quote unquote, but the game is going to be played in Madrid, Spain. And that's going to be it for the international games, thank God. So you have that to start off your morning, depending on where you're at, East Coast or West. And then you have Giants at the Bears, Buffalo, Miami, Baltimore, Minnesota. Not a bad game considering what J.J. McCarthy did there this past Sunday. But now Baltimore seems to be clicking here with Lamar back. Who knows? This could be the start of something there for the Ravens as they get back into the AFC playoff picture. Cleveland at the Jets. Ugh. New England at Tampa. Very good early game. You have to wonder now with the Buccaneers, and I believe they're coming off a bye, having that rest. Maybe they'll put it on the Patriots here. That we'll have to wait and see. But with everything that New England's done here so far in the season, and they surprised me, 7-2. I wasn't a believer in Drake May. And even though Mike Vrabel, the new head coach there, we understand him being a Patriot back in the day, but they have certainly have been overachievers this year. And a lot of that is a product of their schedule. They haven't really played anybody. Their big win was at Buffalo, so you can't knock that one. But it's not as if they played a bunch of ringers here. So you just got to keep that in mind. So this is a very interesting game for the Patriots to see how they stack up against a team, especially in a different conference. So that's a very good 1 o'clock game. Then you have New Orleans at Carolina. I guess you have to say Carolina because they're 5-4 right now. Jacksonville at Houston. Houston trying to get back, but no C.J. Stroud. He's still under the concussion protocol, so he's not going to start. You're going to see Davis Mills there. So that certainly puts a damper on that game. Then you have Arizona at Seattle in the 4 o'clock window. Rams at Niners. That is the game, to me, in my eyes, the game of the day. It's better than New England Tampa. It's better than the Sunday night game, Pittsburgh at L.A. to play the Chargers. Then you have Detroit, Washington. Nobody cares because Washington's, to me, they're out to sea. But Rams, San Francisco. This is an enormous game on so many levels. Rams are 3-0 in the division right now. They win this game, they'll have the tiebreaker over the Rams, and then they have 2 more games left in the division where they can actually run the table. And if they do that, they're going to win the division because they're going to have all the tiebreakers unless somehow, some way, either the Rams or Seahawks end up with a better record than the Niners after Week 18. But the Rams need this game, I think, in my eyes, because remember, they did lose to the Niners earlier this year. They've already lost to the Eagles. So whatever head-to-head with the Eagles at the end of the day, they will lose out on. And they have to go up the coast. This is a 4:25 game. Fox, I would think it's going to be Burkhardt and Brady. Although originally I think they were going to go to Washington, but I would scrap that, get on a flight to go to Santa Clara instead. I would think the Rams, I mean, they're playing well. Niners, they found ways to win. They're still banged up. You still have Mac Jones, no Brock Purdy. And they've been very resourceful. Shanahan has had McVay's number other than the NFC Championship game when the Rams went to the Super Bowl that year. But, yeah, Shanahan always seems to find a way against Sean McVay. But I don't know. I like the way the Rams are playing. And I know they're going to want to get back at them. They're going to need to win. I think they're going to play with a little bit more desperation than San Francisco. I like Stafford over Mac Jones. Therefore, I think the Rams are going to eke out a very close game. That's why I'm looking at it, the game Sunday, 4:25. Now, listen, San Francisco will win. I wouldn't be shocked if they win the game, but I think LA, they realize that they have a lot more at stake than San Francisco does. San Francisco could afford to lose this game. I mean, not that you want to just throw games away and chalk them up as losses, but my point is that because of where they stand in the division at this present moment, and even though it's going to be hotly contested to the end, I think the Rams are going to play with a little bit more urgency and win the game there on Sunday. That's just me. Then you have Pittsburgh at the Chargers. No Joe Alt. He's done with an ankle surgery, offensive lineman, and they have been decimated on the offensive line, even dating back to training camp with Slater being out. So now, can the Steelers defense, who played better last week, and even though the game looked a lot closer than it was, but they took care of the Colts with the 6 turnovers. But that game's going to be interesting to see with the offensive line and how they're going to piecemeal it together, where the Steelers defense is going to try their best to tee off on Justin Herbert. So, and you know I'm going to be dialed into that game. And the Steelers, they're going to have to keep pace because Baltimore's going to Minnesota. That's not to say it's going to be an automatic for Baltimore to win, but let's say if they do win, the Steelers lose in LA, then they're going to be a game behind Pittsburgh, and they haven't played each other yet. They're going to play each other, I believe, right after Thanksgiving. So it's all right in front of the Ravens. If they continue this hot streak, who knows? Maybe they'll catch the Steelers, just like you saw last year late in the season, as we know. Not to bring that up. But those are your big games Sunday. Your Monday night game is Philly at Green Bay, which is an excellent Monday night game. And Green Bay, off of that putrid performance against Carolina the week before, you would think that they're going to be ready to go, clicking on all cylinders. And Philly, who last week are coming off a bye, I believe. Did they not have a bye last week? Off the top of my head, I should know that. Yes, they did. So I was right about that. So that's an excellent Monday night game. Looking forward to that. And your buys this week, Cincinnati, Dallas, Tennessee, and Kansas City before you get to week 11. And that is your NFL there for a week 10. Now, a couple of sad notes in football that had transpired. Last week, I didn't even mention this on Monday's podcast, so my apologies, but George Atkinson, part of that fearsome secondary of the Raiders, led by Jack Tatum, and we know about the Raiders of that time, the Frank Filipianos, now Ted Hendricks was later on, but I mean, you had just a mean, and vicious secondary, and George Atkinson, who couldn't stand Lynn Swann, and just go back to the NFL film, Steelers, Raiders. You're going to see a lot of clotheslines, a lot of dirty tackles, a lot of dirty plays. Well, unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 78. Don't know the cause of his death, but when you watch those films of the 70s and how the Raiders were the Raiders, a lot of that has to do with just the identity of that defense, of how they're nasty and just filthy when it comes to playing against the opposition, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Dies at the age of 78. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Atkinson family, the Raiders, NFL, etc. And the same will be said for Bob Trumpy, the former Bengal tight end who was before my time. And even though Atkinson was a bit before my time too, when I started watching football there in the mid to late 70s. But for Trumpy, like I mentioned, Bengal tight end, but more known to be a color commentator, especially on those NBC broadcasts with Don Criqui. How could you forget the 82 game of San Diego, Miami, that classic down in the Orange Bowl, the Kellen Winslow game, 24-0. The Dolphins came back with the hook and ladder to Don Strock, and that was what I believe Tony Nathan who caught that hook and lateral play. And that was just one of the great playoff games that you'll ever see. And Trumpy was a big part of the NBC broadcast of that time with Don Criqui, and I believe later on with Dick Enberg. Died at the age of 80. Don't know the cause of his death as well, but thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Trumpy family, the Bengals, NFL, etc. Now let me get to the college football, where the committee has come out, and now we're going to really analyze this from here on out. Now again, you're not going to be fully invested until you get to a point once the conference championships are done. And what's the good thing about the committee this year, unlike last year, is that just because you win a conference title doesn't mean you're going to get a top 4 seed. It's going to be based on the merit and where you belong in the top 4 in order to get the bye. So you're not going to have a team that's automatically going to get a bid like the Arizona States of the world. And who was the other team that got a bye in that first round last year? So it was Ohio State, Oregon. No, Ohio State didn't get the first bid. Wait, did they? I'm drawing blanks right now. But just to continue, it's a scenario where you're going to have it 1 through 12 as fair as possible. And of course, it's not the top 12 ranked teams. It's not going to be like that because you're going to have that 5th team that's going to be that independent, which is, in this case, is going to be out of the Group 5, Memphis right now, as they're currently 8-1 out of the American Conference. But you got to like what you see so far based on what the committee has selected. And I understand there's going to be people in certain regions or in certain universities going to be like, hey, wait a minute, this isn't fair. Our team should be up there. Or how come I don't see Oklahoma? How come I don't see Georgia Tech? We only have 1 loss. Why aren't we up there? Or Miami. And listen, Miami doesn't deserve to be up there considering they have 2 losses. But they're going to be schools that are going to look at this and say, wait a minute, this isn't right. I think they got it right so far. And mind you, this is going to be fluid. This isn't a lock of how this is all going to shake down. There's still another month of college football to be played. But your 4 teams right now, and deservedly so, the byes, were Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Alabama. And Alabama beat Georgia, so I don't want to hear anybody from Athens say, oh, man, we deserve that spot. You lost to Alabama, and unfortunately, you're not going to get a top seed. Now, that could change. If Georgia runs the table and Alabama stubs a toe, they do play and host LSU this week, which they usually will beat LSU in their building. But this is a year where Alabama's going to Auburn. And they always seem to have trouble, not the last time withstanding, but they had to overcome a 4th and goal from the 31-yard line, that Jalen Milroe pass, if you recall, in order for them to win that game. But how I look at it is, as of right this moment, I was going to take a sip of my juice, but the 5 through 12, I think, and this is again just based on what they've come up with, is as follows. Now, I'm doing this like in a weird order right here because they have the matchups as Texas Tech, Oregon, which I believe is your 8-9, Ole Miss, Virginia, BYU, and Notre Dame, which I believe that's a 6-11. And then the last one in that group is Georgia and Memphis. I believe Georgia-Memphis is the 5-12. Ole Miss, Virginia is the 7-10. Let me make sure. Let me get this right here, people. I don't want to screw you up. I don't want to be JAYREELZ. Come on, you're lost here. You didn't even know what you're talking about here with this bracket and yada, yada, yada. So it goes as follows. So you got Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, Texas A&M 3, Alabama 4. Your 5-12 is Georgia-Memphis, as I mentioned. Your 8-9 is Texas Tech, Oregon. They're in the bracket with Alabama, Ohio State, because obviously Ohio State, Alabama are the 1-4. Then you have Virginia, Ole Miss, 6-11. BYU, Notre Dame is a 7-10, and they're in the bracket with Texas A&M and Indiana. And as we all know, that could change, but I think they got it right. And with Notre Dame being the independent, I know there's going to be people out there. Well, Notre Dame has 2 losses. Well, do you remember who they lost to? I mean, they lost to Texas A&M and they lost to Miami, who at the time were ranked in the top 10. So, yeah, and I get it. Notre Dame's played nobody since, but that's what happens. And yes, you could say USC, and they beat them, and I know USC is a top-ranked team, so I can't say they beat nobody. But Notre Dame's going to be there. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. And as an independent, the committee's going to look at them and say, all right, well, those 2 losses that they got were against the top teams in the country. So therefore, and I understand Miami's fallen off here a little bit with their 2 losses, but still, overall, they're going to target what the teams and the competition that they face and the strength of schedule. So therefore, that's where the Fighting Irish are going to be a part of the top 12 teams. And other than that, you can't argue with any of the teams that are there. And I understand there are going to be some schools that are going to say, oh, what about us? What about this? What about that? Well, that's going to flip here over the course of the weekend, because the biggest game of the weekend by far in college football, which is going to be high noon. And I understand they're not going to flex it to prime time or anything like that, because I believe LSU Alabama is the primetime game. But right there, high noon for the whole world to see is BYU at Texas Tech. So you're going to have it where the 7 and 8 seed right now in the country are going to go at it, and someone's going to fall and someone's going to move up. So by far, that is the game of the day. I understand there are a couple other games that we can look at here. Now, I'm only bringing up Indiana Penn State for one reason only. I'm sure Penn State, with how everything has unfolded after the loss to Oregon, the brutal loss to UCLA, falling apart literally at the seams, James Franklin getting fired, etc., where now they're probably looking at this game here as their national championship. Because with those losses that they've had here, and they've lost now 5 in a row, and being a team, wait, did I say, hold on a second. I'm going to make sure I got my teams right. Yeah, UCLA, yeah, lost to Ohio State. What was the team I said before? Did I say they lose to? No. I must have my teams mixed up, and then they just got waxed by Ohio State just this past week. Or in their last game. Now they're going to host Indiana. So I would think that they're probably looking at this game as we're going to play fast and loose. We're going to play spoiler. I'm sure they're telling everybody on campus, show up and show out. Let's make sure that we send the Hoosiers back home with an L in there on their ledger. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Indiana's probably going to win soundly. But would I be shocked in my travels there Saturday? No, I should be at home now that I think about it. But I'll be focused more on BYU, Texas Tech. But would I be shocked if we got Penn State 17, Indiana 14, midway through the third quarter? Now, at that point, that's where Indiana will take off and win the game. But strange things have happened. Look at SMU and Miami. Nobody thought that the Hurricanes are going to lose that game, considering they already had lost a game to Louisville in their building, what was it, the week prior. So the way the college football season is played out here, anything can happen. That's the only reason why I bring up that game. That's not a big game, as we know, but it's at high noon. It's early on, part of the schedule. Besides that, your 3:30 game, Texas A&M and Missouri. All right, that's a game of note. Oregon going to Iowa. And Iowa's played very well this year. We know that usually they're a big-time defensive team. Offense, they could barely muster up an inch, let alone a yard at times. But with those two games there in the 3:30 window, A&M and Missouri, and I know Missouri has not played well since the start of their year, but it's in their building, and who knows? I'm not going to sit here to say that A&M, the Aggies, are just going to go in there and show the Tigers what they're all about and then some. And then, like I mentioned, the nightcap, the only game that's of note is LSU Alabama. If the game was in Baton Rouge, I'd be a little bit more intrigued, but Alabama's playing well, and Alabama, I believe, it could be a big-time threat to get to a national championship this year. So that we'll have to wait and see. But that is your college football. And as we move it along here next week, I'm sure that BYU Texas Tech, that's going to put a wrinkle as to who's going to be in and who's going to be out or left out or who knows. So we'll keep an eye on that as we move it along. Now let me lace up the high tops and go throughout the association where a lot has been made over the past few days about Ja Morant. Dating back to last week, he got the suspension with he and his head coach, Thomas Iasalo. And I understand he's a young coach, first-time NBA coach. And who knows what the relationship is with Morant and this head guy, or even the assistant coaches for that matter. But now you have to really take a cold, long, hard look in the mirror if you're both Morant and the Grizzly organization. Because if you're Morant, you've been down this road before. We know about the gun incident in the club, and even when he was driving in the car with one of his boys, that other, incident with him and that 17-year-old. They were playing hoops outside of his one of his friend's homes, and then his friend got involved, and he was sticking up for his friend, and supposedly he punched that 17-year-old in the face, and all these allegations. Then you have his injuries, which are big. He's had the shoulder injury, he's had knee injuries, he hasn't been healthy. Then he had that, obviously, the suspension all of last year, or was it the prior year? But obviously, he has a very checkered past. And it's quite odd because he comes from at least a household where he and his father has had a great relationship, shows up to his games, and was there draft night. I don't know the situation about his mom, but he has a father figure that obviously is a rock in his life. But there has to be something else that's going on behind the scenes with Morant. And listen, I am not a psychoanalyst, psychologist, etc. But with the way recently his responses toward the media when he asked about, your relationship with the coach, or your relationship with this team, ask them, you got to talk to them. And when the question that came up about, are you playing with joy? And that's paraphrasing. And his answer was flat out no. Now, does he not like playing in Memphis anymore? Does he not like the coach? Does he not want to single out the coach, call out the coach, make it a thing where he's going to talk through the media about the coach, the organization, etc.? Obviously, I don't know that. But if you read between the lines, something's not right there with him. And I don't know what is going on with his life. I just hope that if it is a mental health thing, even dating back to the whole gun incident in the club in Denver, that he's been seeking help. I understand he said that in interviews in the past. I met with Adam Silver. I'm trying to work on me being the best me, so on and so forth. Well, let's face it. If he has been working on it, he has not been successful. Because if he doesn't have any joy playing, maybe there's something that's going on behind the scenes that we don't know. So with that being said, I hope he's getting the help that he needs. And I hope that the Grizzly organization is doing everything they can in order for him to get the help that he needs. Because again, unless he has some independent, I don't want to say contractor, but unless he has an independent physician that he seeks or that he meets with, whether weekly, bi-monthly, who knows, I would think that the organization is going to do whatever it takes to try to get him the help that he absolutely needs. And if not, shame on the organization. But then the flip side of that is, if he's not happy and is not playing with joy because he doesn't want to be on the team, despite the fact that we understand when he is on, he is a top 10 player in the sport. Maybe top 15 best. Top 10 could be a little bit too ambitious, but we know that he's a very talented player. Dynamic, explosive, all of it. But now where do you go if you're the Grizzlies? Do you think that maybe it's time to part ways, considering that we've had enough? We don't want to deal with this anymore. Are we going to get back more than equal value, or at least equal value, for a guy who is proven, when healthy, and that's a big when, not only physically, but also you got to think about mentally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically too, in this case, where are we going to have to get this player for only 60 cents on the dollar? Or can we get full value? More than that? Who knows? And he's a guy that you can get back a ton, which made me start to think of teams that, if you're the Grizzlies, who could you shop him to? Now, I don't know anything as far as rumblings, rumors, etc. This is just me looking at the situation and trying to analyze it from afar and thinking of destinations where you could go. And I had 3 that were in mind. Now, if you're Memphis, you want to trade him to the East. You do not want to keep him in the West, because then you have to see him 3 to 4 times a year, maybe in the postseason, and who knows, he's probably going to use that against you down the road. Whereas if it was in the East, you're going to see him twice a year, and maybe, if you're lucky, in an NBA final. So I've only looked at 3 teams in the East. If you have a team out West, for those who are watching, please leave a comment in the description box below, and I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. But for the 3 teams are as follows, and I'll go 3-1. The third team I thought about were the Pistons, because the Pistons have young assets. I understand you don't want to give up all those young assets, but they're a team that they could work with to try to give up maybe some first-round draft picks. I know they'll be low draft picks, but let's say you want to swap picks in the coming years, or we'll give you a number 1 this year, a number 1 in 28, and we'll pick swap in 27, and you'll trade Jaden Ivey, who I understand is coming off some serious health issues, and maybe a frontline player, and away we go. That would be for starters. Then you have a backcourt of Morant and Cade Cunningham. I understand that's tricky too, because you're going to have 2 ball-dominant type players, but you could have Cade play more perimeter. Yes, he can attack the basket, but you can leave that for Morant. You hear me? Morant. Let's get my letters correct here. You can leave it for Ja Morant and work out some way when you're the coach, JB Bickerstaff, in order for those guys to coalesce and be a dynamic backcourt, which would arguably be the most dynamic backcourt in the NBA. That's team number 3. Number 2, I don't know how they do it. They would have to do a Brooklyn, New York situation. You probably have to get a third team involved if you're the Miami Heat. But you know Pat Riley, pulling rabbits out of hats. And the Heat right now, they are in the basketball purgatory, let's face it. I understand Bam Adebayo, good player. Tyler Hero, who's been hurt, very good player. But they need to have a guy. And Ja Morant, I think, in the backcourt with Hero, who could chuck threes, and I understand Morant's going to want the ball, he's going to want to shoot too. But with Riley, Heat culture, veteran presence, and that's what they need. That's what he needs, I should say, Ja Morant. He needs to have some veteran presence. He needs to have guys that are going to, I don't want to say put him in check, because I don't want to look at Ja Morant as a loose cannon, but I think he needs those figures in the locker room that are going to take him under his wing and say, this is how we do it here. And I understand it's Miami, lifestyle, glitz, glam, ladies, that can be tricky also. But with that Heat culture, with that coach, with that organization, I think he'd be a good fit about what you're going to give up for him. The Heat have nothing after those 2 players. I know Norman Powell's a good player, but he just got there. So you're not going to trade him. And that's why they're going to have to trade a bunch of top picks, whether that's similar to what I mentioned about the Pistons. All right, we're going to give you 4 first-round picks, which would be dangerous, but the Heat have to do something. That's my team number 2. My team number 1, and they have a boatload of picks. They don't have a veteran presence. The team does not have an identity even. But if you want to attract fans to your building and have a little bit of a buzz, despite no veteran presence, despite a future that with all the draft picks, and we understand those aren't a given either. And I don't know if this is the direction that they want to go, but if they have any thought and any idea, Joe Tsai, the Brooklyn Nets, I think he'd be the perfect landing spot to go there because that would be his team. And I understand he's not a leader, and I understand he's been all over the place, off the court, etc. And that's where it's also dangerous. And then it's New York City, more glitz, more glam, more lifestyle, nights out, long nights out, etc. But if you could somehow, some way, and I understand the Nico Claxtons of the world and the Cam Thomases, I get it. Solid NBA players, but they're not NBA players amongst the powers that be as far as being a top flight player in the league. They're not a top 20, top 30, top 50 player, those guys. And that's not a knock, that's just a fact. But the Nets have a surplus of picks from the Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant, from the remnants of other trades that they've made, Kyrie to Dallas. So, therefore, they can maneuver, they can shake, and I'm sure they probably have to bring in another team as well in order to broker this deal. But I think that would also be a good fit from a standpoint of him having his own team and him starting over. I'm sure he'll get a new lease on life, whether he went to Miami, whether he went to Detroit, or even to Brooklyn. But are they at the crossroads to where the Grizzlies are ready to make a deal? That I don't know. But I gave them 3 destinations, and I'm sure there are a few more out there. But if they didn't want to trade him out west to another team and wanted to send him east, I think those would be the top 3 teams. Not going to say Boston because then you got to pay Morant, and obviously they let go of Drew Holiday or traded Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis for that reason. So And the Pistons, they don't have a lot of guys that are max contracts guys with, other than I believe Kate Cunningham. But other than that, you don't have a guy that's making a boatload of money. And in Miami, I understand you have Bam, who just got an extension, and Tyler Herro's making big money, but I'm sure they could find Morant to get him in under that second apron. Besides that, I don't know where he's going to go, especially in the East. Philly's got a ton of players with max money. You got Milwaukee with Giannis. Maybe they could strike up a deal, but then again, Milwaukee doesn't have much to give up. You got Orlando, but they already got Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner. They paid for Desmond Bane. I don't even know if they gave him an extension, but they traded for him. So, yeah, I don't know if he'd go there. That would actually be a decent fit, too, Orlando. But then you have to trade Jalen Suggs. I don't know if they want to do that. He would be probably one of the big pieces in that deal. But anyway, just as what it is that I do, giving you some analysis and just my opinion on what could happen here with Morant. That's not to say a trade's going to happen today, next week, next month, maybe by the All-Star break if he plays well and increases his stock a little bit. But that's what I got there when it comes to Morant and that situation there in Memphis. And besides that, what else can you say? That's it. I'll talk about what's happening in the schedule. I know the Lakers are playing well, 7-2. They beat the Spurs last night. And give it up, speaking of the Nets, they won a game as well as New Orleans. So they break the snide. The last 2 teams that were winless, they both won games where the Nets won in Indiana and New Orleans last night. They were on the road, and that's the even more surprising thing, that both of the games that the Pelicans and Nets won were on the road. And New Orleans won in Dallas last night. So kudos to the Pelicans for getting off the snide. And the other one last thing, too, I understand that the Nets, I don't know if they want to go this route with Morant when you think it back when they did it the other way, where they brought in the aging player, whether it was KG, Paul Pierce, or later on with KD, Kyrie, and even James Harden. So now when they go in that direction where they got all these picks, and now they want to bring in a young player that they know they could build, that can be a part of the future there in Brooklyn, it does make sense, but it's still a big-time gamble. Would I do it? I'd have to think long and hard because of the track record. And yeah, you just want to make sure that Ja is all in. That is the most important thing. And is Brooklyn that destination? I don't know. It'd be tough, but it's an option. I'll say that. But you have the Lakers are playing well, and LeBron, we still don't know when he's going to come back. And that's going to be interesting to see once he comes back how much of a lift he's going to bring. I mean, you would think he's going to bring even that much more of a lift, and with the sciatica issue, so that we'll have to look out for. But other than that, you have the Bulls who beat the Sixers the other day, and now the Sixers got off to 5-0. Now they've lost 2 of the last 3. Or 4-0 they were. But Pistons are playing well at 6-2. Knicks, who won their first 2, then lost 3 in a row, and now won 3 in a row. So they've righted the ship a little bit. Very pedestrian. You don't have a team that's out to this big lead or that has gone out to really separate themselves. Everybody's still pretty much where they're at. Oklahoma City lost their first game of the year, losing in Portland. You knew that was going to happen. They beat the Clippers a couple nights ago, and then last night, I believe it was last night, they lose. So no big whoop there. But now you have all teams with at least a loss under their belt, with the Thunder being the last team that was undefeated. Like I said, Lakers playing well. They're 7-2, and they've won 5 in a row. And the Rockets off to a slow start, but they've won 5 in a row, so they've played well. Same for the Nuggets. Teams that have been disappointing, real quick. Let's see. Orlando's gone off to a very bad start, and I picked them as an over this year, which is not looking good for me. 3-5. I'd have to say that's very disappointing for them. Out west, maybe the Mavericks. Mavericks should be a little bit better than 2-6, and they got the worst record in the Western Conference. As a matter of fact, the Pelicans, I said they won their first game the other night against the Hornets. So here I am. I'm screwing up. They've won 2 in a row. JAYREELZ, got to give it the program. What's happening here? Did you overlook the Hornet win the other night? I guess I did. So they've won 2 games. So my apologies there. As you well know, full transparency, so I got to own up to that. Hand raised high. So, yeah, that's what you have in the NBA. As far as the schedule for the weekend, anything interesting? Clippers in Phoenix tonight, who beat the Spurs the other night to snap their streak to start off the year. Tomorrow, Boston and Orlando, Cleveland and Washington, Detroit at Brooklyn, Toronto, Atlanta, Houston, San Antonio. That's your prime game at 7:30. Your 10 o'clock prime game is Golden State at Denver. And that was a weird game the other day. No Curry, no Draymond, nobody. And who did they play? And they won the game too. Sacramento. And Westbrook had a big time. That was the game last night. No Sabonis. And Westbrook had a big game, another triple-double. Now's the most rebounds by a guard in NBA history, who eclipsed Jason Kidd, I believe, all time. Charlotte, Miami, Dallas, Memphis. Yeah, that's your games on Friday. Saturday, Toronto, Philly, Dallas, Washington. Lakers in Atlanta. Portland, Miami, New Orleans, San Antonio, Indiana, Denver, Phoenix at LA to play the Clips. So that's a home and home. Sunday, Houston, Milwaukee. Brooklyn at the Knicks. Boston, Orlando. So talk about a home and home. Boston and Orlando over the weekend. So they'll get their 2 games out of the way against Orlando this year on the road. Oklahoma City at Memphis, Detroit, Philly, Indiana, Golden State, Minnesota, Sacramento. That rounds out your NBA. And college basketball is not part of the mix. I won't get into that right now, but I know the season has begun. You've had games that are being played. I believe Duke won the other day, if I'm not mistaken, and Michigan did too. So, yeah, college basketball is part of our consciousness, although right now, way too early to get into that. And we'll discuss that as we move it along here, especially if some of these games or matchups are big. So stand by for that. Now's at least on my skates to go across the ice, where last night you had Alexander Ovechkin, the grade 8, reach the 900 goal plateau in a 6-1 win over the St. Louis Blues. And for Ovechkin, who is in the final year of his deal, 40 years of age, you would think this would be it for him. Now, 1,000, he still has 99 to go, which could probably be, and for him, who knows? That could be the remainder of this season. If he gets, let's say, over 40 goals, and he went into this year, 896, so he has 4 goals now, or 895, whatever it was. So even if he scores 45 goals this year, which is another 40, so he's at 8 or 940, he still has to score 60 goals next year, which is going to be impossible. So if you want to look ahead to 1,000, be my guest, but he's going to have to play 3 years in order to get that, and that's 43 years of age. Hockey, we know, is a brutal sport, although the guy's pretty much indestructible. But the funny thing about that last night was, if you saw, Jordan Binnington, what did he do after Ovechkin got goal 900 and was on a backhand? He decided, let me take this goal or this puck and let me skate over to the boards. He tried to sneak it into a back pocket there in the hip. And then the official came over and said, wait a minute, where's that puck? Do you have that puck? And Binnington had to say, all right, here it is. So I thought that was kind of funny for Binnington to kind of sneak that away. I mean, listen, 900, Now, I think any goal that he gets from here on out is going to be the goal, or any puck, I should say, because, right, 900 is that rounded milestone. And even though every puck after that, I'm sure it's going to be on the Ovechkin mantle, or maybe go to the Hall of Fame, or who knows it's going to get bid somewhere. But we understand 900, that is a sweet number. So even if he ends with like 914, 914, although that is going to be the last one, but that's not going to be more than 913 or 910 or 909 or whatever it is. So, all right, 900 we get, and that final one is going to be important. Or let's say if he gets to 950, if he plays past next year. But anyway, or past this year. So I just thought to throw that out there with Ovechkin as him getting to 900. And besides that, in the sport overall, what do we have? I know that the Stars are going to host a Stadium Series game in 2027 in February of next year, or 2 years, not really next year, because next year is 2026. Stars host a game in AT&T Stadium, so you know Jerry's going to be on his high horse then to have the game in his building. Obviously, we don't know who the opponent's going to be. It's still way too early to tell. So you have that going on. But the NHL on a whole, at this present moment, Canadians and Red Wings still playing well. Maple Leafs and Bruins trying to get back to the top of the Atlantic Division. Panthers. And this is going to be a team, I've said it. Right now, they are at 500, 6-6-1. In their last 10, they're 3-6-1. And this is going to be a team, they probably have said it. We're all right now. We'll creep up. But if we make the tournament, nobody's going to play us. And they'll have Matthew Tkachuk back. They probably won't have Alexander Barkov unless miraculously he's working behind the scenes to try to get back by the playoffs. But Panthers right now mired last place in the Atlantic Division. Then you have Devils continue to play well. Penguins surprisingly well, though they lost their last two. Carolina off that hot start. They've cooled off a bit at 500. When they started 5-0-0, so since then they're 3-4-0, although they had a 6-4 in the last 10. Out west, Colorado with that crazy record, 8-1-5. All those overtime losses, but they have the most points in the sport for the Lanch. Utah's continue to play well. Dallas trying to find their footing. Minnesota and St. Louis, not play too well. And remember, St. Louis had that 12-game winning streak in the latter part of last year in order to qualify for the playoffs. So, are they going to have another year like that this year? Who knows? Give it up for Anaheim. I picked them as an over this year, and they played well. Tops of the division with the Golden Knights. Kraken have already, they've cooled off a little bit, but they've hung around and played well. Edmonton's still trying to find their way. San Jose has played better since their slow start. Calgary there at the bottom. Vancouver also trying to play their way back. That's your NHL. And you know the NHL and NBA, they're going to play into the clouds at times because unless there's a big game or a big situation, whatever. I didn't even talk about the fight last week with Ryan Reeves and Matt Rempe. And that tete-a-tete at Madison Square Garden, I think it was the week before. That just goes to show you how I didn't really unpack that. But NHL, like I said, they're going to be in and out of the clouds here over the course of the next few weeks. And until we get a point where there's going to be some big games or stuff that's really going to talk about, I'll be on top of it. But that's what you have in the NHL. And then lastly, as I break out the cleats, and get into the batter's box real quick. With the baseball season over, as I mentioned at the very top, as we all know, but now you have a situation where the free agents are starting to opt out of their current deals and are looking forward to bigger paydays, especially as we're now a year and change ahead of what could be a long, cold winter next year with the CBA. And that's going to be interesting how these GMs are going to look at this offseason, knowing that they're going to say, to hell with it, we're going to go for it this year to try to win a championship, or they're going to say, we're thinking of the long game. We don't want to pay these guys and then have them on the books to where we're going to revamp the system or at least try to revamp the system come next December. And therefore, who knows if there's going to be baseball in 2027. Now, I will say this. You would only hope that Rob Manfred, the commissioner, Tony Clark, and the other attorney, I can't think of his name, that works with Tony Clark at the head of the Players Union. You would only hope, can we get some discussions here prior to the winter meetings and the hot stove there in the first or early part of December? Can we have a little kumbaya maybe over Thanksgiving, a little spread there with some turkey, some stuffing, a little pumpkin pie, where they could at least break some bread to say, all right, we know salary cap's a dirty word amongst the players, but we got to work something out here. We want to have competitive balance. We want to have certain things, and we've been able to give you, the players, X amount of things over the years, but now, come on, it's got to be a little give and take. What's going to happen here? Because we all know the competitive balance tax and the luxury tax, teams are going to surpass that if they want to, and we understand there's only a handful of teams that are going to do that, but that all ties into the free agency here in this offseason, I think, to a certain degree. And with the players like Alex Bregman, whether your name is Cody Bellinger, we know about Pete Alonso. You have Bo Bichette, which kudos to Bo Bichette, the anti-Pete Alonso. Yes, my player, Pete Alonso. Because they asked Bo Bichette right after the World Series, and I get it. It's as crushing and devastating of a loss you could possibly digest. But even then, the Mets went through their own devastating scenario where if they would have won Game 162 with the Brewers beating the Reds, they would have been into the postseason. And they got shut out by the Marlins on that final day. And 5 minutes before the Met body was even cold, and they were about to be put into that drawer, whatever it is, in the mausoleum, before you can light it up on fire and say rest in peace to the 2025 body that was the New York Mets. What did Pete Alonso do? Oh, you're going to opt out? Yes, I'm opting out this year. All right, Pete. Way to be honest. Kudos. But geez, where Bo Bichette said, of course I'd like to stay in Toronto. Now, he just said that. That doesn't mean that he gave an oath to the organization. But it's not as if he said, yeah, I'm opting out. Or, you know what, I don't want to talk about that right now. And that's his right to say that. But, yeah, Bo Bichette and even Edwin Diaz. And I'm going to say this now in regards to the Mets and their fans. If you would ask me, who would you sign first, Pete Alonso or Edwin Diaz? I don't think it's even close. You got to sign Edwin Diaz. And people are going to say, well, JAYREELZ, Pete Alonso, all-time home run franchise career leader, the polar bear. You got to bring him back. Original Met, homegrown Met, etc. Edwin Diaz, let him walk. We'll get somebody else to close games. We'll figure it out. Well, I'm not trying to make Edwin Diaz out to be Mariano Rivera. And we know Edwin Diaz has had success here in New York as a closer. This past year, very good. 2022 was off the charts. But if you let him go, and I understand you don't want to break the bank for him as you did 3 years ago, 5 years over $100 million, or right at that number. But let's face it, if the Mets don't have a closer next year and they're blowing games left and right, Pete Alonso can hit 60 home runs. Mets aren't going to go to the playoffs. You'd rather have that guy that's going to lock down that ninth inning or maybe even eighth to ninth inning, as we've seen Diaz do in the past, in order for you to get where you want to go. So me as a Met fan, if you're going to ask which guy am I going to sign before the other, I'm talking to Diaz's representation before I talk to Alonso's representation. And that's not because Scott Boras is the guy that is leading the brigade for Pete Alonso. You got to get a closer. They don't grow on trees. I understand sluggers don't either, but you know what? I can get another slugger somewhere else and kind of piecemeal them in for a lot cheaper. And yes, I'm going to have to pay through the nose for Diaz, but guess what? There's only a handful of guys that do what Diaz does well as opposed to what Alonso does well. There's more guys that do that than what Diaz does. Case closed. That's what I got to say about that. Shota Imanaga, that's another guy. Maybe the Mets can have him on his radar. The lefty from Chicago, the Cubs. Why not? I'd rather go after him. And that's another thing too, Met fans, if you ask me. I'd rather go after Imanaga, although his numbers suffered in his second year as opposed to his first year. And Framber Valdez does have more of a track record. I get that. But Valdez, when he's good, he's very good. But when he's bad, as the old Donna Summer song, Bad Girls, oh, it wasn't even Bad Girls. It was Last Dance. He's so bad. Yeah. So, and he's probably going to cost a lot more than I think than Imanaga. Unless he's represented by Boris, for all I know, maybe that's the case. So that's what I'm looking at there as far as the offseason, because the Mets need starting pitching and to get Diaz back in the fold. And I'm going to say that first and foremost right out the bat. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll see how that all unfolds. A couple other things. Yu Darvish done for 2026 with Tommy John surgery, and he's up there in age. What is he, 37, 38 years of age? Listen, unless he pulls a Justin Verlander and comes back with a bionic arm and maybe closes out his career on a high note, quite possibly, but he's done for next year with the Padres. So who knows what the Padres are going to do this offseason as far as getting a guy of that ilk to be on their pitching staff. And then lastly, Walt Weiss is, or second to last, Walt Weiss, the new manager in Atlanta, as Brian Snitker mutually parting ways with the organization. But then now you wonder if there is a little bit of gamesmanship on the Brave front office, because they didn't bring one. They brought in two former Met coaches to be a part of their staff. Jeremy Hefner, as far as the pitching coach, and Antoine Richardson, who was the third base coach. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the first base coach. I don't know if he's going to be the first base coach or a bench coach, who knows? But I wonder if that's a little bit of a touche to the Mets to kind of needle them to say, yeah, we took two of your guys, and watch Hefner be the next Leo Mazzoni, who did do a good job here. Maybe not this past year, but obviously in 2024 with the likes of Luis Severino and Jose Quintana and Sean Manaea. But yeah, so that's something you got to keep in mind there, Met fans, to see what's going to go on there. But you also have Chris Sale sticking with the Braves with an $18 million option on top of Shane Bieber staying in Toronto, $16 million. Jack Flaherty in Detroit, $20 million. So those guys are going to hold steady there with their organizations and those teams. And then lastly, I kind of hate to end the podcast on this note. Does the name Victor Conti ring a bell? You're probably thinking Victor Conti. Yeah, it does ring a bell. Yes, he was the founder of Balco, the Bay Area Lab Cooperative, otherwise known as the, I don't want to say steroid king, that's too strong. But his ties with a lot of the Olympic athletes, baseball players, most notably Barry Bonds, as you know, died at the age of 75. I don't even know what he passed away from. I believe, didn't they say he had pancreatic cancer? I believe that was the case with Conti. But for him, and we know how dirty he was, I'm not going to go into the particulars and break down what he had done with his situation there in the Bay Area. But I only bring that up because obviously he was a huge figurehead and all that with Bonds in the early 2000s and the steroid era, etc. And not to make him that, like I said, that figurehead, but a lot of people went to him, the Marion Jones of the world, allegedly, etc. But Victor Conti, 75 years of age, just thought to throw that in there to close it out. I know it's a weird one, but there you have it, people. I know Trevor Story is also going to stay with the Red Sox next year, so that's another free agent that's not going to be out there for anybody to procure. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about the toy department in life called sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review on Apple, Spotify, the website, JAYREELZ.com, and of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. I've eclipsed 750, currently 752 subscribers. I've had a little bit of a boost here over the last couple of weeks. So if you can continue to support, share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, take a screenshot, share it on social media with me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or on Instagram, just JAYREELZ. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. Please do so. Tag me. I'll share it on my social media. Share with those who like sports, love sports, the casual, the diehard, the kook sports fan like yours truly. Not only that, but also have lifestyle content, which I've been saying, but there's a lot going on here with me, yours truly. Remember, I'm an independent podcaster, content creator. This is my full-time job. So, yes, I'm trying to make ends here, trying to generate some revenue, some income. So, me being the one-man operation is a little bit difficult. So that's why if you could go to the YouTube channel and hit subscribe, it would mean the world to me. Just so people will recognize that the podcast not only is streamed on the audio platforms, although you can see the video on Spotify as well, but the YouTube channel, because I post content there daily. I post on what's going on daily with the world of sports. Obviously, the podcast twice a week. I also host a live stream, not only on Wednesdays from high noon Eastern time, but also my podcast pregame Monday and Thursday, the day of the podcast that are released, 9:30 a.m. So you can get at me on those days as well. And commentary content, as well as critique content, lifestyle content, you name it. because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and camera, and to avoid going back into the corporate lifestyle, you know that I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. And don't forget, it's in the blood, in the DNA. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.